like this.
So they're called stupid people because they vote for him and don't like his policies. Or are they hypocrites?
I don't
Stupid
know.
hypocrites.
I don't live in
Choose one of them.
But on the wealth tax front, this is a very interesting setup because Newsom is against it.
During Trump's first 4 years, he had virtually nothing to say about the crisis, nothing to say about it in the next 4 years. But I'm glad that there is some discussion. The truth of the matter is, in my view, that the current healthcare system is broken.
That's what unfolds when the night's most sharp-edged ringmaster pokes at a senator who seems fueled by oatmeal and pure irritation. Chaos follows. Order disappears fast. Greg Gutfeld doesn't just clash with Bernie Sanders. He flips the entire setup, cranks up the intensity, and throws out a question no cable news host ever wants to answer on air. The result was more uncomfortable than anyone expected. It caught people off guard, lingered longer than planned, and sparked reactions that refused to fade. So what exactly did he say? And why are people still arguing about it now?
Learn America. First, politics is like real estate. Location, location, location. As forceful as Bernie's vision was, it was in the wrong place. America. Being a socialist in the most successful economy in history is like trying to sell Ben and Jerry's in Siberia. America.
Well, I want to ask my Republican friends a simple question. Are you happy with the fact that here in the United States, we are the only major country not to guarantee health care to every man, woman, and child? We are unique.
You know you won't want to skip what comes next, so tap like and subscribe before we move on. Watching a longtime politician who spent decades cautioning America about greedy billionaires get sharply questioned by a late-night host whose career revolves around pointing out moral blind spots is always entertaining. The contrast alone makes it compelling, and the timing turns it into a moment people can't stop talking about.
He looks like he never showers and wants to work fewer hours. Bernie Sanders goes nuts and looks like a putz. Our video of the day comes from a mysterious old man in Washington, D.C., waving his hands and making noises. Roll it.
Senator Sanders, can I talk to you about the 32-hour work week? It seems like Fox Business. It seems like Democrats want businesses to be taxed more, pay their workers.
Really? Is that what you think?
pay their workers.
Excuse me.
When Greg Gutfeld turned his attention to Bernie Sanders, the result was exactly that kind of moment. What followed wasn't just the usual loud clash between opposing political sides. Instead, it unfolded as a layered and almost thoughtful confrontation, where raw populist anger met sharp, relentless humor. It felt less like a simple argument and more like a battle of ideas, with frustration on one side and cutting satire on the other, each pushing back in its own distinct way.
I'm always troubled by why the woke don't call their policies what they are. That is not a tax. It's just a confiscation because no gains are being realized. Mm-hmm. So that is not a tax. It's a linguistic deception. It's like calling three people who hate each other Fox and Friends. Never understood that. He has no interest in the answers that you like. Why isn't he talking to people? Because he's not in charge.
Most Americans think they have Bernie Sanders figured out. To them, he is the senator who has spent his entire career calling out what he views as a broken system, unchecked corporate power, and unfair economic conditions that leave many people behind.
Listen to a 70-year-old try to sell a bad idea that's twice his age and said, no way. And that youth vote looks like the 50-plus crowd who pay their bills, make wiser choices. Surprise. Meanwhile, with Joe, that cardboard contraption may have structural flaws, but at least it's standing in the right place. Plus, he remembered his pants. As one wise man once said, perhaps yesterday on this very show, Dana, the Dems voting for Biden are purchasing a teardown.
Bernie Sanders' supporters view him as honest and dependable because his message has stayed largely the same for decades, seeing in him a man who never backed down, softened his stance, or changed his voice despite political pressure, which is why they consider him the last true populist. Greg Gutfeld, however, challenged that image by stepping away from the usual left versus right argument and questioning the persona itself. He didn't see Sanders as a political mastermind or a dangerous radical, but as a carefully maintained brand. According to the transcript, Gutfeld argued that Sanders' political identity now resembles performance more than progress. suggesting that he relies on anger in the same way entertainers rely on applause. The emotional reaction becomes the reward, repetition brings comfort, and a familiar routine tells the audience when to respond. While supporters claim this consistency reflects authenticity because issues like healthcare costs and student debt remain unsolved, Gutfeld turned that logic around, arguing that repeating the same message without clear results may signal something far more revealing.
Wow. Bernie hasn't been that fired up since he sent a bowl of soup back at the deli. He's after billionaires now that he's a millionaire. Had to change that. Answering that question was the hardest he's ever worked. I think he needs a vacation at one of his 3 houses. So that was FBN's very own Hillary Vaughn, or Mrs. Peter Doocy.
Gutfeld leaned into the irony that one of the most visible and financially successful figures in American politics often condemns wealth and privilege, using that contrast to question the very system that helped build such a powerful personal image. He didn't frame it as an accusation of wrongdoing, but as an open-ended riddle worth examining more closely. The discussion grew more intense when he widened the lens to culture, arguing that Sanders' rhetoric has shaped how an entire generation thinks about success, especially when it comes to billionaires and large companies. For many younger people, business now appears less like ambition and more like exploitation, which led Gutfeld to ask whether that mindset encourages real progress or simply fuels resentment. At that point, the focus moved away from policy and toward human behavior. Gutfeld suggested that Sanders' appeal lies in his moral certainty and his ability to clearly separate heroes from villains, offering comfort during political uncertainty. When problems are pinned on a small group of wealthy figures, complex economic realities feel easier to understand. Yet Gutfeld questioned that storyline by noting that many of the major reforms Sanders champions remain unrealized despite years of fiery speeches and massive public support.
To enact some radical policies by the same people who are running all the corruption. He's just another puppet. I don't think you can get a clearer contrast. What is the first thing a Republican does when he's in office? He deregulates. He frees up capital. He gets businesses going. He'll fund the police. What is the first thing a Dem does? Besides moving out of their parents' house? Raise taxes. It's not cut fraud. It's not, look at waste or abuse. It's raise taxes, which only incentivizes more waste, fraud.
Gutfeld framed the issue with a sharp question. If the message stays the same, but the outcomes do not, what does that say about the plan behind it? Rather than calling it dishonest, he treated it like a real-world test of effectiveness. His critique grew firmer as he warned that nonstop campaigning can sometimes replace actual governing. Sanders, he argued, often sounds as though he is still running for office, with an intensity that never fades and a rally-style delivery that never quite shuts off. That approach keeps supporters fired up and the conversation loud, but it also keeps emotions running high. The discussion then shifted to media dynamics, where frequent attacks from conservatives only reinforce Sanders' image as an outsider. Gutfeld's point wasn't that Sanders lacks belief, but that belief alone does not produce answers. This cycle, he suggested, helps sustain a recognizable image, while slogans about taxing the wealthy overlook the complicated realities of lawmaking, global markets, and modern technology. In the end, he reminded viewers that an economy does not operate based on cheers or applause.
Sure. Are you content with the fact that the insurance companies and the drug companies are making huge profits, paying their CEOs exorbitant salaries? Are you happy with that? Are you happy that patients in America have to get on the phone and fight like crazy and deal with all kinds of bureaucrats in order to get the health care that they paid for in an incredibly complicated, broken system? So if you want to have a debate about healthcare, let's have that debate.
The discussion then turned to wealth itself, with Gutfeld pushing back on the idea that large fortunes automatically point to moral failure. He argued that in a global, creative economy, standout success often comes from meeting real demand, not from taking advantage of others. By casting wealthy people as villains, he said, Sanders simplifies an issue that is far more layered. Critics, of course, respond that concentrated wealth can bend economic opportunity and political influence, a debate that still sits at the center of modern American politics. Gutfeld added a fresh angle by questioning whether treating wealth as an enemy actually leads to meaningful reform. He also highlighted Sanders' staying power, noting that few politicians remain nationally relevant for so long. To him, that endurance signals how persistent these economic problems are, since movements usually fade once their goals are met. Still, Gutfeld warned that progress can slow if the same explanation is repeated year after year without adjusting how the problem is addressed.
Two choices: the radically wrong, who honestly reflects the party's secret socialism, or the conventional codger, who will limp to the finish line to deliver someone younger and new, like Hillary. It could work. But if they don't get Biden prepped and propped before Trump, it'll be like feeding old-growth logs to a wood chipper. All right, Jesse, Bernie's staying in, huh? Do you think here's a conspiracy? Yeah. He's staying in because he's not sure Joe's going to...
Throughout the night, Gutfeld relied on humor as a lens, not a distraction. He used exaggeration to challenge assumptions and irony to expose contradictions, keeping the mood playful while tackling serious ideas. Beneath the jokes were big questions. Can a movement run forever on anger? Can clear moral messaging exist alongside complicated policy? And can a political identity stay genuine once it becomes part of the system it once fought? What stood out most was what the exchange revealed about today's political culture. Sanders represents unwavering belief in an ideology, while Gutfeld embodies skepticism toward ideological purity itself. The tension wasn't really about specific laws, but about ways of thinking. Sanders speaks in terms like structural unfairness, shared duty, and moral pressure, while Gutfeld questioned whether that framing ultimately helps or hurts. Opposition can ignite movements, but governing requires compromise, and modern politics often lives in the clash between those forces. That unresolved ending is what makes the story compelling. Gutfeld will keep pushing back against what he sees as excess. Sanders will keep pressing for systemic change, and their clash reflects a broader national debate over freedom, fairness, and the government's role in shaping economic outcomes.
Asking Bernie Sanders about his proposal to establish a 32-hour work week in the U.S. with no reduction in pay. The bill would also reduce the threshold for those who work overtime, something Sanders has never done. Unless, of course, you count that time he tried to comb his hair. But has Bernie even worked 32 hours in his life? You can push this bill, which promotes employees getting paid more to work less, but most people just call that working for the government.
In the end, what the exchange represents, rather than who gained rhetorical points, is what makes Gutfeld's criticism of Sanders significant. It draws attention to the persistent gap between those who believe that overregulation is a bigger concern and those who believe that inequality is the primary challenge of our time. It emphasizes how difficult it is to balance pragmatism and emotion. Above all, it serves as a reminder that Sanders' story is about reform and injustice, and that narrative is just as crucial to political conversation as facts. The main elements of Gutfeld's story are skepticism and unexpected results. In a media landscape that prioritizes confidence and clarity, both stories contend for viewers' attention. Viewers saw more than normal, regardless of whether they supported the senator or the sadist. The outcome is not silence. Friction is the cause. It's up for debate. It serves as a reminder that in a democracy, ideas must endure both praise and criticism. That's exactly what Greg Gutfeld's challenge to Bernie Sanders accomplished. In a world of cliques and tragedies in the media, this kind of intellectual debate might be the most useful tool. It challenged a movement, scrutinized a brand, and had viewers reevaluate presumptions they might have taken for granted.
Kat, you gotta love old man Sanders.
Yeah.
You know, he could have been a great president.
He won the fight.
He won the fight. Were you happy to see two old men fighting over something besides you?
No, I kind of missed the attention. No, and you know what's crazy to watch that too? Bernie Sanders, he won the fight he didn't stand up, he didn't even lift his head.
No.
Okay? And he didn't even break a sweat. And also, that man is older than Joe Biden.
When you look at how both men first built their followings, the contrast becomes clearer. Greg Gutfeld didn't rise by acting like a traditional political commentator. Instead, he understood early on that culture often moves faster than policy. He saw that comedy could reach people who had long tuned out standard TV news, and he sharpened his timing and tone around that insight. Bernie Sanders, meanwhile, gained traction by presenting himself as the rare politician who would not trade his principles for comfort or popularity. When Gutfeld challenged Sanders, he was pushing back against more than one individual. He was questioning a mindset that has shaped how many younger people think about politics. To Gutfeld's audience, Sanders' language often sounds like an invitation for expanded government power. He argued that repeated talk of billionaires and corporate greed risks turning complex issues into simple symbols. These reactions highlight how closely political choices and personal identity are now connected. Gutfeld also warned about unintended consequences, suggesting that large government programs and higher taxes can shift incentives in surprising ways, since markets respond to signals and creativity thrives where money and opportunity can move freely.
So the problem with Donald Trump, he's a businessman who decided to be a politician. Business teaches you to speak your mind. Politics tell you to do the opposite. In business, you sell a product. In politics, you sell yourself. Which is why Bernie Sanders is a good politician. It's all he does. He's been running for office since 1972, affording him the luxury of selling a failed ideology that never requires purchase. Socialism, a harmless thing until it finds real power, then it's...
Sanders hypothesized that by emphasizing redistribution so much, he might be downplaying the vulnerability of the mechanisms that produce wealth in the first place. Sanders' followers claim that unrestricted markets have already caused distortions in everything from housing shortages to healthcare pricing. The conversation resonated because of that tension. It was more than simply political theater. It was a distilled version of a national debate about whether reform should be radical or gradual. Gutfeld also criticized speech itself. He proposed that expectations are shaped by language and political stability is shaped by expectations. Gutfeld emphasized the paradox of permanence and maintained that controlling expectations is just as crucial as motivating them. Because Sanders has been an outsider for so long, the establishment has learned to accept him as such. Gutfeld thought it strange that someone who opposes the status quo now had so much institutional power. According to Gutfeld, this dichotomy makes the story of revolution more difficult to understand. Ultimately, the segment's impact stemmed from its refusal to portray Sanders as an extremist without providing background.
The point is, corrupt enterprises, they're not designed to reduce their corruption or their enterprise. It's, the mob doesn't decide to go into actual sanitation. They're never going to change. Democrats are never going to change. They are, and Jessica, I can't believe you don't know this. They are the party of corruption. We're seeing it now. Billions and trillions of dollars that are being taken out of the government into these fake businesses. You have these weird puppets from...
Gutfeld showed that he understood the real financial pressures many Americans were dealing with, from rising costs to wages that refused to grow. His question wasn't whether people were frustrated, but whether Sanders' plan truly offered the best way forward. By recognizing public anger while still challenging the proposed answers, he lifted the exchange beyond simple ridicule. Moments like this stand out in today's media space because they break the usual pattern. Viewers are far more accustomed to politicians defending themselves or commentators picking sides than to a discussion that examines the deeper ideas behind popular slogans. Gutfeld's remarks went beyond numbers and tax brackets, pushing instead at the logic behind the story used to justify them. As the exchange spread across television clips and social feeds, it became clear that American politics is about more than laws alone. This was less a viral moment and more a snapshot of a country at an ideological crossroads, drawing audiences into a larger conversation they couldn't easily ignore, whether they felt persuaded, irritated, or simply entertained.